I was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store in New Orleans, holding 2 bags of oranges and a carton of milk, when I saw my own painting on the screen of my phone. The headline said, "Mysterious Painting Takes New Orleans Art Scene by Storm. Collector Pays $32,000. Artist Still Unknown." And underneath the headline, there it was, my painting, the one I had called The Window. The last painting I had finished before my husband decided to teach me a lesson. 3 weeks earlier, my husband Nathan had carried every canvas I had ever painted out of our basement and stacked them on the curb on bulk trash pickup day. 27 paintings. 17 years of my soul. 17 years of the only part of me that still remembered how to feel alive. When I got home that afternoon, I found 26 of them soaked in rain, crushed under somebody's old refrigerator. The 27th was gone. The one I loved the most. The one I had painted for Mama Josephine, the grandmother who had taught me to hold a brush when I was 4 years old. I had cried on that wet curb for an hour. I had convinced myself that the last piece of me was gone forever. And now, 3 weeks later, I was standing in a grocery store parking lot, looking at a photograph of that exact painting on my phone, sold for $32,000 by a gallery in the French Quarter, with a plaque next to it that read, "Artist Unknown." My hands started to shake. The carton of milk slipped out of my fingers and burst open on the asphalt. I did not bend down to pick it up. I stood there in the middle of that parking lot, whispering the only words I could find. Someone saved it. Saved. Someone took it out of the trash. What I did not know, standing there in that parking lot with milk pooling around my sneakers, was that the next morning, that same someone was going to knock on my front door. And the man who had put my paintings out with the garbage was the one who would answer. But to understand how any of this happened, I have to go back to the beginning. My name is Celeste Moreau. I am 44 years old, and I have lived in New Orleans, Louisiana my entire life. My grandmother, Mama Josephine, was a painter. She was born in Trem, grew up in a little shotgun house 3 blocks from Congo Square, and she painted every day of her life until the cancer took her when I was 19 years old. She never sold a single canvas. She said her paintings were not for strangers. They were for the walls of the people she loved. Mama Josephine put a brush in my hand when I was 4 years old. By the time I was 12, I had filled 3 sketchbooks. By the time I was 17, I had won the state art competition for high school seniors in Louisiana and received a full scholarship to study painting at Tulane University. I painted through college. I painted through my first little apartment in the Marigny. I painted through 2 years of teaching art at a public elementary school in the 9th Ward. I had small shows at local galleries. I sold pieces. I was building something. I was becoming someone. And then I met Nathan. Nathan was not an artist. He was a regional manager for a mid-size insurance company, the kind of man who wore ironed shirts on Saturday and organized his coffee mugs by color. He was handsome, steady, ambitious. He told me on our second date that he loved the way I saw the world. He told me on our 4th date that he had never met anyone as creative as I was. He told me, 2 months before our wedding, that he wanted to build a life where I could paint full-time, and he would take care of everything else. I believed him. We got married when I was 27. We bought a small house in Gentilly, a neighborhood of 2-bedroom bungalows and old oak trees. I turned the spare room into a studio. For about a year, I kept painting. I finished 3 canvases that I was really proud of. And then Nathan got a promotion, and we moved to a bigger house in the suburbs, and my studio somehow became his home office, and my paintbrushes got packed into a box that ended up in the basement. I stopped painting. I did not stop because Nathan asked me to. He never asked, but slowly, quietly, over the first 5 years of our marriage, I became a person who did not paint anymore. I became a person who made dinner every night at 6:30 because that was when Nathan got home. I became a person who kept the house spotless because Nathan liked the house spotless. I became a person who organized Nathan's company Christmas parties and memorized the names of Nathan's colleagues and laughed at Nathan's colleagues' jokes even when they were not funny. I did not hate my life. I want to be clear about that. Nathan was not a violent man. He did not hit me. He did not scream at me. He was, for most of those years, kind in a distant sort of way, the way a landlord is kind to a tenant who pays rent on time. But I had stopped painting. And then, 3 years ago, on my 41st birthday, my sister Danielle gave me a set of brushes. "Because you used to be somebody who painted," she said, "and I miss her." I took those brushes down to the basement that night. I set up an old easel I had saved from college. I bought 3 canvases from the art supply store in mid-city, and I started to paint again. I painted in the basement because Nathan did not like the smell of oil paint upstairs. I painted at night because I did not want to take away from the time I spent with Nathan. I painted in secret because, somewhere deep down, I already knew what would happen if Nathan ever really saw what I was doing down there. 3 years, 27 canvases, every single one of them a window back into the woman Mama Josephine had raised me to be. And every single one of them sitting quietly in the basement where nobody but me and the ghost of my grandmother ever saw them. Until Nathan decided to see them. The first time Nathan said something about the painting, I had been back at it for about 6 months. It was a Saturday morning. He came downstairs in his bathrobe, holding a cup of coffee, and he stood at the door of the basement watching me work for a long time. I was finishing a small canvas, just 12 inches by 12 inches, of a woman sitting on a stoop in trim. "How long have you been down here?" he asked. "A couple of hours." "It's Saturday." "I know. We were supposed to go to brunch with Chad and Melissa." I had forgotten about brunch. I apologized. I washed my hands. I went upstairs and got dressed. But that night at dinner, Nathan mentioned the basement 3 separate times. "She spends more time down there than up here with me," he told his brother on the phone, laughing the way he laughed when something was not actually funny. The comments started small. They always start small. "Are you painting again tonight?" "Another painting? Really?" You know, most wives have real hobbies. Book clubs, garden clubs, things they do with other people. "I feel like I barely see you anymore." I told myself he was just insecure. I told myself he did not understand what painting meant to me, but that he would come to understand. I told myself I could paint less, spend more time upstairs, make him feel more important. I cut my painting time from 4 nights a week to 3, then 2. Then I started lying to him. I would tell him I was reading in the bedroom and then sneak down to the basement for an hour after he fell asleep. It did not matter. Nathan always seemed to know. The fights got louder, the comments got sharper. "I swear, Celeste, sometimes I feel like I married your paintbrushes, not you. Do you know how humiliating it is when my co-workers ask what you do and I have to say my wife spends her free time down in the basement with some little art project? This is not a career. This is not even a real hobby. You are not a young art student anymore. You are 44 years old." The last thing he said to me on the Wednesday night before everything happened was the worst one. He stood at the top of the basement stairs. I had just finished the painting I would later call The Window. It was the last one I would ever paint in that house. A woman sitting alone at a rain-streaked window in the French Quarter, looking out at a Sunday morning sky. I had dedicated it to Mama Josephine. I had written her initials, small, in the bottom right corner, the way my grandmother used to do. Nathan looked at that canvas on the easel. He looked at me, and he said very calmly, "I have been patient with this for 3 years. I am done being patient." He turned around and went upstairs. The next morning, I had to drive 3 hours north to Shreveport to visit my mother, who had just been hospitalized for a mild stroke. I packed an overnight bag. I told Nathan I would be home Friday afternoon. He nodded without looking up from his laptop. I kissed the top of his head. He did not kiss me back. That was Thursday morning. I got home on Friday evening, just after 6. The sky over New Orleans was turning that particular shade of pink that only happens in late spring, the color Mama Josephine used to call The sky god paints when he is feeling generous. I was tired. My mother was stable, but the drive had exhausted me. I was thinking about what I would make for dinner. I was thinking about whether Nathan would be home. I was thinking about the painting I had left on my easel and whether after our fight on Wednesday I should just give him a break for a week and stay out of the basement. Then I turned onto our street and I saw the pile. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. There was a mountain of trash on the curb in front of our house, stacked 2 feet high. A broken bookshelf, cardboard boxes, an old mini refrigerator that had been in our garage for years, and, leaning against all of it, on top of it, buried under it, 27 of my paintings. My foot slipped off the gas pedal. The car drifted forward and stopped crooked against the curb, 3 houses down. For a few seconds, I could not breathe. Then I ran. I ran down the sidewalk in my work shoes, my purse still on my shoulder, and I started pulling the canvases out of the trash pile with both hands. The rain had come through earlier in the afternoon. Most of them were soaked. The frames were warped. One of them had a smear of motor oil across the center. Another had been ripped down the middle, right through the face of the woman I had painted sitting at her kitchen table. I was crying, but I was not making sound. I was just pulling canvases, counting them, stacking them on the grass. 1, 2, 5, 10, 15. I kept counting. 20, 22, 26, 26. I stopped. I counted again. I went back through the trash pile, lifting the refrigerator, moving the broken bookshelf, checking the cardboard boxes. Only 26 paintings were there. And I knew before I even finished counting which one was missing. The window. The painting I had dedicated to Mama Josephine. The last one I had finished. The one I loved the most. I sat down on the wet grass next to a pile of my own ruined art, and I looked up at the street, and I saw a black van turning the corner at the end of our block. It was already too far for me to see the license plate. It disappeared around the corner, and it was gone. Nathan opened the front door. He came out onto the porch holding a can of beer. He looked down at me sitting on the grass. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "I told you I was done being patient." I did not respond. I could not. My mouth was open, but there were no words coming out of it. "Get up," he said. "The neighbors are watching." I got up. I carried 26 ruined canvases into our garage, one by one, over the course of an hour. Nathan watched me through the front window the whole time. He did not help. He did not speak to me for the rest of the night. I slept on the couch. In the morning, I went down to the basement, and I looked at the empty easel. I picked up a rag off the floor. I wiped the paint off the little table where I mixed my colors. I put the caps on all the tubes of oil paint and stacked them in a cardboard box. I told myself I was never going to paint again. I carried the box upstairs and put it in the back of my closet. For 3 weeks, I did not open it. 3 weeks after the night Nathan threw out my paintings, I was standing in the parking lot of the Whole Foods on Magazine Street when my phone buzzed with a news notification. I almost did not look at it. I had been numb for 21 days. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner. I did not speak to Nathan more than I had to. I did not sleep in our bed anymore. I slept in the guest room with the door closed. He had not come to knock on the door. I do not think he even noticed. But something made me glance down at my phone. The headline was from a local New Orleans arts blog I had followed for years. It said, "Mysterious painting takes New Orleans art scene by storm. Collector pays $32,000. Artist still unknown." I tapped on the headline. The page loaded, and at the top of the article was a photograph of a painting. It was my painting, the window, the one that had gone missing from the trash pile, the one I had painted for Mama Josephine. I stood in that parking lot and I read the article 3 times. A local gallerist named Margaret Vance had opened a small solo exhibition at her gallery in the French Quarter about 2 weeks earlier. The exhibition had featured one painting, just one. Recovered, the article said, under unusual circumstances that Margaret had declined to discuss. She had named the show The Mystery of the Window. The show had sold out in 48 hours. A collector from Houston had paid $32,000 for the painting. Margaret Vance was now, according to the article, on a personal mission to find the artist. "Whoever painted this piece," Margaret had told the journalist, "is one of the most extraordinary voices I have encountered in my 30-year career. I will not rest until I find her. And I have reason to believe she is somewhere right here in New Orleans." I sat down on a concrete parking block in front of the grocery store. I read the article for a fourth time, then a fifth. She was looking for me. A curator I had never met, holding a painting I had made in secret, in a basement, in the dead of night, while my husband snored upstairs. I did not tell Nathan. I did not tell anyone. I drove home with the groceries, and I put them away, and I cooked dinner, and I went to bed in the guest room with my phone pressed against my chest. I lay awake most of the night, trying to figure out what to do. Should I go to the gallery? Should I email? Would they believe me? I had no photographs of the painting on my phone. I had never taken one. Mama Josephine had always said photographs flattened a painting. I had listened to her. I fell asleep around 4 a.m. with no plan, no courage, and no idea that the decision was about to be taken out of my hands. Saturday afternoon, 2 days after I had read the article in the Whole Foods parking lot. I had gone out again, this time to pick up dry cleaning and stop at the pharmacy. Nathan was home, drinking a beer on the couch, watching a college football game with the volume turned up too loud. That was how he spent most weekends now. I was 2 blocks from our house, driving slowly because there was construction on the cross street, when I saw it. A black van, parked on our street, right in front of our house. My heart started beating so hard I had to pull over at the corner. A woman was standing on our front porch, silver hair cut short, a long charcoal coat, even though it was 75 degrees outside. She was knocking on our front door. The door opened. Nathan stepped onto the porch in his sweatpants, holding his beer. I could not hear them from where I was parked, but I did not need to. I put my car back in drive. I rolled down the block. I pulled into our driveway. I sat in the car for 10 seconds with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing. Then I got out. As I walked up the front walk, I could hear Nathan saying, in that loud, friendly voice he used with strangers, "Oh, those old paintings. Yeah, that was my wife's little basement project. She used to mess around with that stuff. Nothing serious. I cleaned all that out a few weeks ago." And I heard the woman in the charcoal coat say, in a voice that was quiet but unmistakably sharp, "Sir, one of those paintings sold last week for $32,000. The Whitney Museum has contacted my gallery 3 times in the last 7 days. Your wife is one of the most important painters I have encountered in 30 years. Where is she?" Nathan's face went white. I stepped onto the porch. The woman turned to look at me. Her eyes moved from my face to the car behind me, to Nathan and back to my face, and she said, "Are you the woman who painted the window?" I looked at Nathan. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the floor of the porch. I turned back to the woman in the charcoal coat. "Yes," I said, "I am." She smiled, a slow, quiet smile. "My name is Margaret Vance. I own the Vance Gallery in the French Quarter. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks. May I come inside?" Nathan did not move. Margaret brushed past him as if he was a piece of furniture. I followed her in. We walked through the living room, past Nathan's football game still playing on the television, past the kitchen to the door that led down to the basement. "I assume," Margaret said, stopping at the top of the stairs, "that there are more." 26 more, I said. "In the garage. Most of them are damaged." Margaret Vance looked at me with the steadiest eyes I had ever seen in my life. "Show me." Over the next hour, Margaret Vance walked through our garage, looking at the paintings Nathan had thrown out. She did not speak. She studied each one, some of them for a long time. Some of them had holes in them. Some of them were warped. Some of them had motor oil across the front. Some of them were still intact. When she was finished, she turned to me and she said, "Celeste, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me very clearly. These paintings, even the damaged ones, are extraordinary. I want to put together the largest solo exhibition this gallery has ever hosted. I want to call it The Basement Years. I want to open in 6 weeks, and I want to represent you for the rest of your career." I could not speak. "I can offer you a 50% advance on projected sales. My estimate is that this show will sell for more than $1,800,000 on opening night. The Whitney is already in discussion. So is the Ogden Museum. So is a collector in Paris who I have been working with for 20 years. I started to cry. Margaret put her hand gently on my arm. "Celeste, do you have somewhere you can go tonight? Because I do not think you are going to want to sleep in this house again." I nodded. I packed a bag in 20 minutes. I put my grandmother's brushes in the bag first, before anything else. I walked out of the front door with Margaret Vance, and I did not look back at Nathan, who was still standing in the living room with a can of beer in his hand. Staring at a football game he was no longer watching. I spent that night at my sister Danielle's house. I slept for 11 hours. The next morning, I filed for divorce. The exhibition opened 6 weeks later. It was not a show. It was an event. 400 people came to the opening. Critics flew in from New York, Los Angeles, and London. The New York Times wrote about it the next morning. Vogue did a 3-page profile on me 2 months later, titled, "The New Orleans Artist Who Rose from Her Own Trash." The window was the centerpiece of the exhibition, lit from above, with a small plaque underneath that read, "The Window, rescued from a pile of household trash on Bernard Avenue. Now part of the Whitney Museum of American Art permanent collection." The total sales on opening night came to $1,930,000. I bought a studio in the French Quarter 3 weeks later. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a gallery space downstairs, tall windows that opened onto a balcony where I could see the Mississippi River if I stood on my toes. I painted there every single day. Nathan did not come to the opening. He was not invited. But I knew he had seen the news, because the lawyer handling our divorce told me that Nathan had hired a new attorney that same week, a man who specialized in equitable distribution in high-asset cases. Nathan was going to try to claim half of everything. My attorney, a sharp woman from uptown named Dominique Gaspard, looked at me across her desk, and she smiled. "Celeste, honey, he threw those paintings in the trash. There are witnesses. There are photographs. The gallery has security footage from the night Margaret Vance picked up the window. He abandoned that property. Under Louisiana law, that material was legally discarded. Nothing he produced after that moment has any claim on the proceeds of your art." Nathan's lawyer dropped the case within a month. The divorce went through in the fall. I kept the studio, the gallery representation, every painting, and the advance from Margaret. Nathan kept the house in the suburbs. About 2 months after the opening, a reporter from the Washington Post published a profile on me that went into detail about the night I had come home to find my paintings in a trash pile. Margaret had been interviewed for the piece. So had my sister Danielle. So had Dominique. My name was on the front page of the arts section. Nathan's name was in the article too, not his full name, just "the husband who threw 27 paintings out with the garbage." But New Orleans is a small city. Everyone knew who he was. Nathan was fired from his insurance company 3 weeks later. The official reason was unrelated to personal matters. The unofficial reason, according to a friend of mine who still worked in that world, was that his boss had read the Washington Post profile and decided the company did not need that kind of story attached to its leadership team. Nathan moved out of New Orleans. I heard he went to Baton Rouge. I never saw him again. Months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I was standing in the Vance Gallery finishing the walkthrough for my second exhibition when a man walked in. He was wearing a gray jacket. He stopped in front of the window. He stood there for a long time. I watched him from across the room. I do not know if he saw me. I do not know if he even looked for me. He read the plaque under the painting. He stood there for another full minute. Then he turned around, and he walked out of the gallery without looking back. I do not know if it was Nathan. The light in the gallery that afternoon was strange, and the man's face was turned mostly away from me. But I believe it was him. I believe he came to see the painting he had thrown in the trash, and I believe he understood finally what he had done. I did not chase him. I did not call out. I stayed where I was, in the middle of my own gallery, surrounded by my own paintings, and I let him walk out of my life the way he had walked into it, on his own terms, with nothing to show for it. Today, I am writing this from the balcony of my studio in the French Quarter. The Mississippi is out there, moving slow and wide the way it always does. A cup of chicory coffee is cooling on the little wrought iron table next to me. Mama Josephine's brushes are in a ceramic jar by the window. I use them every day. The window hangs in the Whitney Museum of American Art on the 3rd floor, in a room dedicated to contemporary Southern painters. I have been to New York 4 times to see it. Each time, I stand in front of it for a while, and I think about the woman who sat on a wet curb in Gentilly, surrounded by ruined canvases, convinced that every piece of herself had been thrown away. I want to tell her something. I want to tell her this. Sometimes the people who love you cannot see you. Sometimes they look at the most precious parts of you and they call it trash. And sometimes, on the day it happens, a stranger is driving by. A stranger who has been looking for something her whole life without even knowing it. A stranger who stops at the curb, in the rain, and picks up the one thing that should never have been thrown away. They threw me out with the garbage, and that was the day I finally came home to myself.